$3. That's all he had. 3 crumpled, dirt-smeared bills in the pocket of a coat that hadn't known warmth in years. And he would have spent them on coffee. Or maybe a new rope. But by sundown, those $3 would buy something else entirely. Something no man should ever have to purchase. That morning in Copper Falls, the dust clung to your tongue and the air stank of horses' sweat and desperation. Folks came from every corner of the territory. Ranchers, drifters, miners, with calloused hands and mean eyes. But no one expected what was about to happen, not even him. His name was Silas Ward, 53 winters and none of them kind. A rancher without a herd, a man who talked to ghosts more than people. He rode into town like smoke, quiet, invisible, looking for nothing. But sometimes nothing has teeth. And this one bit hard. He heard it before he saw it. A voice sharp, greasy, loud as a rusted blade dragging through tin, cutting through the market noise. Next up it barked, young, healthy, good condition. And the crowd. They gathered like wolves. Silas turned his head, just a glance, just enough to see the wooden crate and the child standing on top like meat on a butcher's block. A Chinese girl. No shoes, no name. Eyes like broken glass in a house long abandoned. Something in him shifted. Just a tick. Like an old gun cocking back. The bidding started at $2. Someone laughed. Another spat. A man in a black coat raised $3. And Silas, God help him, he opened his damn mouth. $3.50. The words fell like thunder. Heads turned. The auctioneer froze mid-motion. The girl looked straight at him, and in her eyes was a scream so loud it didn't need sound. He didn't have $3.50. He had $3. Exactly. And now every man in that crowd wanted to see what the old hermit would do with his prize. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment when the dust stopped dancing and Copper Falls held its breath. The wind that morning was cruel. It didn't blow, it scraped, like God was dragging nails across the sky. Silas Ward pulled his coat tighter, but the cold didn't bother him. He'd lived through worse, buried worse. $3 in his pocket, that's all he had. Not enough for a fresh start, barely enough for rope and coffee. But it was enough to make a mistake. He rode into Copper Falls slow. Dust curled around the hooves of his mare Ruth, old and stubborn like her rider. The town was alive with Saturday hunger men shouting wagons, rattling traders, haggling over rusted tools and sour beef. Silas didn't care. He kept to the edge. Eyes down, hands steady on the reins. A man like him had no business in the center of things. Not anymore. But then came the voice. Slick, oily, loud enough to silence a barroom. Next lot, young female, good condition. Speak a little English, if that's what you need. Laughter, thick, ugly. Silas turned his head, and the world changed. A crowd had formed outside the old grain warehouse, men packed shoulder to shoulder, sweat and smoke rising like fog, and on that wooden crate stood a girl. Chinese. No shoes, hair matted with dirt and blood. Hands clenched at her sides like she was holding in her soul. She couldn't have been more than 13. But the way she stood straight-backed, chin high, told him she'd survived more than most grown men ever would. The auctioneer barked, $2.253. Silas stepped forward. He wasn't thinking. He wasn't even breathing. $3.50. It came out quiet. But it cut. The whole crowd turned, eyes narrowed. Some amused, some angry. The auctioneer blinked, thrown off. Do I hear $3.50 going once? Silas touched his coat. Knew what he had. $3. Flat, the gavel rose. A voice behind him, rough, familiar. You short Silas Marshall Tucker, hat low, face unreadable. Without waiting for an answer, he pressed 2 quarters into Silas's palm. "Pay the man." Silas stepped forward, handed over the coins and the last of his bills. The gavel slammed, and just like that, he owned her. But as he stared at the paper in his hand, ink still wet, something in his chest twisted. Not pride, not fear, something older. The girl didn't move, just stared at him, not with thanks, not with hate, with something far heavier, expectation. And Silas Ward realized he hadn't saved her, not yet. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't even flinch when the gavel came down and the paper passed hands. She just stood there barefoot on splintered wood, the wind tugging at her ragged dress like it wanted to carry her away. Her skin was pale under the dust, her lips cracked and one eye swollen like a fruit left to rot. But her gaze, it didn't plead. It measured. Like she'd already seen the worst a man could do and was waiting to see if Silas Ward would be any different. He approached, slow boots crunching dry earth. The market was already losing interest, the crowd drifting toward the cattle pens where the goods had thicker hides and fewer bruises. Silas stopped a few paces from her, lowered his voice to something soft. "I'm Silas," he said. "Ain't gonna hurt you." His hand hung in the air open, not demanding, just offering. The girl stared at it, unmoving. Her silence wasn't fear, it was caution built from wounds older than she was. Then barely audible, a whisper curled into the air, "Min." Her English was broken, but her meaning was clear. Silas nodded. "That's a good name." He glanced down at the bill of sale in his other hand, ink still wet, still smelling like something dead. Folded it without looking, shoved it into his coat. "You hungry?" he asked. Min paused, then gave the smallest nod. It was like watching a branch bend under its first drop of rain. He led her through the street, not holding her, just walking beside her. People stared long, hard, and with enough venom to curdle milk. Children whispered behind skirts. Men turned to spit. A Chinese girl with a white rancher. In Copper Falls, that wasn't just unusual. It was gasoline waiting for a spark. Min walked like someone used to shrinking her shoulders, pulled in her head low. But her eyes stayed on him, watching every move. She didn't trust him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she followed. They reached the diner. Silas stepped toward the door, but the owner was already there, arms folded across a grease-stained apron. "We don't serve her kind here," he said flatly. "Try the alley behind Chen's Laundry. That's where they belong." His eyes flicked toward Min, like she was an insect on the floor. Silas felt something settle in his chest, cold, slow and sharp. Behind him he sensed Min retreat half a step. Not with her feet, but her soul, like she'd been here before, countless times, and expected nothing but the same. He stepped forward, close. His voice came out like gravel under boot. "Her money's as good as mine, and I'm paying." The man didn't budge, just smirked. "Careful, Ward. People are talking, asking what a man like you wants with a girl like that." Silas didn't blink, didn't answer, because behind him, boots hit the dirt, slow, measured. A new voice slid through the air like a drawn knife. "Problem here, gentlemen?" Marshal Tucker, hat tipped low, one hand resting on his Colt, his eyes sharp as glass. Min looked up at him, not with fear, but with a question in her eyes. Is this man different too? And as the air thickened with silence, Silas knew one thing from this moment forward. Nothing would be simple. They hadn't walked into a town. They'd stepped into a storm. The first thing Silas noticed was Tucker's hand. Not the one resting on his Colt, but the other slow and steady reaching into his coat pocket. No words yet. Just movement. deliberate. Then 2 silver quarters glinted in the morning light. He didn't flash them, didn't make a speech. Just walked over, pressed them into Silas's palm, and said in a voice only he could hear, "Pay the man." Silas looked down at the coins. Cool metal, light weight. But somehow they felt heavy, like judgment, like trust, like a rope thrown to a man who never asked to be saved. He stepped forward and handed the auctioneer the exact amount, $3.50. The man counted it twice, lips moving without sound. Then he gave a grunt, nodded, and shoved the bill of sale into Silas's hand, like he was selling rusted tools, not a life. "She's yours." The paper felt warm from the ink. It stuck to Silas's fingers like something alive. The crowd dispersed, but the whispers didn't. Ward's gone soft. Buying himself a souvenir. Heard he talks to cows. Now he's talking to chinks. Tucker didn't say a word. Just stood there, eyes on the crowd, daring them to say it louder. When they didn't, he turned to Silas. "You sure about this?" "No," Silas answered, honest as drought. Tucker nodded like he understood. "Town's gonna remember, one way or another." He tipped his hat and walked off, boots dragging lines through the dust like scars on the earth. Silas looked down at Min. She was still there, still watching him, still not running. He tucked the bill of sale into his jacket, feeling like he'd just swallowed something sharp. Then he led her away from the auction block, away from the blood-stained crate, away from the place where people bid on bones and fear. They passed a preacher who turned his back, a woman who hissed through her teeth, a boy no older than 10 who threw a clod of dirt at Min's feet. She didn't flinch. Neither did Silas. But inside, something was shaking loose. Something that had been buried for a long time. They reached the edge of the market, a quiet stretch of street between the post office and an old stable. Silas stopped and let out a long, tired breath. He looked down at Min. "You want to eat or not?" She nodded again, just once. "All right," he said. "There's a place across the street. We'll try again." But he knew what was waiting. Not food, not kindness, judgment. Because in Copper Falls, a man's choices didn't echo. They thundered. And the town was already listening. The door never opened. Not all the way. Just enough for the man inside to lean out, arms folded, jaw tight, voice flat as a tombstone. "We don't serve her kind here." Silas didn't blink. "I'm paying." The man's eyes slid to Min. Not as a person, not even as a child. Just a problem, a blemish. Makes no difference. If you're hungry, you can both try the alley behind Chen's laundry. Plenty of scraps back there. Min lowered her eyes. Slowly, silently, like this wasn't the first door slammed in her face. And Silas felt it. The shift, like something cold cracked in his chest. He stepped forward, just one step, enough to make the owner lean back. "Her money's as good as mine," Silas said, voice steady but tight. "And mine keeps this place open." The man didn't flinch, just sneered. "Maybe you've been alone too long, Ward. People are talking. They saw what you did this morning, saw what you bought." He paused. Let it hang in the air like smoke before dropping the match. Wouldn't want folks getting the wrong idea about your intentions. Silas stared at him, long and hard. The kind of look that once ended bar fights before they started. Behind him, Min took another step back. Her shoulders folded in again, like a curtain being drawn. And that's when Silas realized he could walk away. He could tell himself it wasn't worth it. That one meal wouldn't change a thing. But it would. It would change her. Confirm what the world had already screamed into her bones. You don't matter. You don't belong. So Silas did something he hadn't done in years. He raised his voice. "Open the damn door." People nearby stopped moving. A knife paused mid-apple at a vendor's stand. A glass bottle clinked too loud on the counter across the street. But before the man could answer, another voice slid through the air. Calm, measured, cold. "Problem here, gentlemen, Marshal Tucker." Again, like a shadow that carried a badge. He stepped between them, boots soft on the planks, hand resting casually, but not kindly on his gun. The owner lifted both hands. "Just explaining house rules." Tucker smiled without warmth. "Funny thing about rules. They tend to shift when the law walks in." He turned to Silas. "Mrs. Henderson's got stew on the fire and a room open. I suggest you try there." He didn't wait for thanks, just stepped aside. Silas nodded once. "Come on," he said to Min. She followed. Quiet. But something had changed. Her steps weren't as small, her shoulders not quite as low. And as they walked toward Henderson's, Silas felt the town's eyes on their backs, watching, judging, wounding, but not stopping them, not yet. The stew was hot, thick, rich with pepper and fat. It steamed from the bowl like something sacred. Min stared at it like it was a dream she didn't trust. Her spoon trembled in her fingers. She picked it up slow, careful, like it might vanish if she moved too fast. Silas sat across from her, arms crossed back to the corner like always. One eye on the room, one ear on the street outside. The boarding house was quiet, but not peaceful. Too many eyes. Too many whispers. Mrs. Henderson had set them up in the corner. A small table worn clean from years of elbows and prayer. She didn't say much. Just looked at Min, nodded once, and brought out food. The kind gesture of a woman who'd seen pain walk through her door before. Min took her first bite. Small. Then a second. Bigger. Her lips moved fast now. Chewing, swallowing, holding back the tears that burned behind her eyes. Silas watched her eat. Watched her shoulders shake. Watched the blood drain from his own hands as something old and rusted turned in his gut. He didn't speak. He let the food do the talking. Let the warmth say what words couldn't. Then the door opened. Not loud, not fast, just certain. 3 men stepped inside, dust still clinging to their boots like ash. Cord Jennings, big, red-faced, land-rich and soul-poor. Blake Jennings, his son. Mean grin, fingers twitching near his belt. And Frank Morrison, overseer of the East Mine, greasy like his deals. They didn't sit, didn't ask, just walked straight toward the table. Min stopped chewing, set her spoon down. Her hands disappeared beneath the table, folded tight in her lap like she was bracing for a storm. Silas didn't move, didn't blink, just set his coffee down and looked up. Ward Cord barked. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Silas's voice came back low. "Steady, eating dinner." "My problem," Cord growled, "is you made every man in this town look like a damn fool, bidding on her like she's worth something." Min's breath caught. Her eyes fixed on the wood grain in front of her. Silas stood slowly. His chair scraped the floor like a warning shot. "Watch your mouth, Jennings." Blake stepped forward, hand brushing the grip of his revolver. "Or what, old man? You gonna fight us over some yellow skin?" The air went still, heavy. Min looked up. Just once. Her eyes weren't full of tears, not this time. They were full of fire. But before Silas could speak, before words could turn into bullets, the front door opened again. Boots hit the floor. Not fast, not loud, but final. Marshal Tucker. Again, uninvited, unshaken. "Gentlemen," he said, voice calm as a still lake. "I hope we're not about to spill blood in Mrs. Henderson's stew house." No one moved. Not Jennings, not Morrison, not Blake with his hand still hovering near the butt of his pistol. The only sound was the soft clink of Min's spoon as it slid off the edge of the table and hit the floor. She didn't pick it up, just stared at Tucker like he was something unreal, like a door that shouldn't have opened, but did. The marshal stepped farther in, boots firm, shoulders squared. His coat brushed back just enough to show his badge, just enough to show his Colt. Now Tucker said slowly, "I understand this town's got its ways, got its traditions, hell got its shadows. But what I don't understand," he turned to Cord Jennings, "is where exactly the law allows you to buy a human being like she was cattle." Cord's jaw twitched. That auction was legal. Was it? Tucker raised an eyebrow. "Because I checked." He tapped the papers folded in his hand. "The ones running that little circus out by the grain warehouse? They ain't got a shred of legal claim to that girl. No guardianship, no immigration papers, nothing." Frank Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Now hold on." "No," Tucker cut him off, voice colder. "You hold on. You and half the damn town bid on her this morning. And if that auction wasn't legal?" He let the silence speak. "Then you weren't just making fools of yourselves. You were participating in human trafficking." The room tightened like a noose. Blake looked like he wanted to shout, maybe draw, maybe run. But Cord grabbed his son's arm hard enough to turn knuckles white. "You can't be serious," Cord growled. "You're siding with him." He jabbed a finger toward Silas. Tucker's eyes didn't flinch. "I'm not siding with anyone. I'm siding with the law. And right now, the only man in this room who hasn't broken it is Silas Ward." He stepped forward once more. Not fast, not threatening, but with weight. "So, here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're all going to turn around and walk out of this boarding house. You're going to let this girl finish her meal. And you're going to pray I don't decide to start writing names down in my report to the territorial judge." Cord looked at Morrison. Morrison looked at Blake. And slowly, reluctantly, they backed away. "This ain't over, Ward," Blake spat. Tucker turned to him. "You're right, it ain't. Because next time any of you lay a hand on that girl or that man, I'll make damn sure it ends in court or in Pinewood. Your choice." The door slammed behind them. The air in the dining room shifted like a pressure had finally broken. Mrs. Henderson exhaled sharply and began wiping the counter with trembling hands. Tucker sat across from Silas and Min. His face was tired now. Less fire, more weight. "You two all right?" Silas nodded barely. Min just stared at him like he'd rewired the world. But then Tucker leaned in close. His voice dropped. "This town's not done. Word's spreading fast, and not all of them will knock before they come." The mob was growing. Outside the boarding house, the street trembled with the weight of boots and rage. Men gathered in clusters, some drunk, some righteous, most just hungry for a reason to hurt something. Anything. Min sat frozen, her empty bowl in front of her, her spoon untouched since the moment Cord Jennings walked in. Silas saw her flinch when a rock hit the window. Not the glass, the wall beside it. A warning. "They're spreading out," Tucker said, his voice grim, watching through the blinds. "Looking for other ways in. Then we need out," Silas replied. "There's a wagon out back," Mrs. Henderson spoke up, her voice shaking but firm. "My husband's old rig, ain't much but the mare's tough. She'll take you far as the ridge if you're fast." Silas stood. "I'll get her out." Tucker blocked the kitchen door. "Your horse is out front. You step into that street, they'll cut you down before you can blink. Then we don't go through the street." The back door opened with a groan. The alley behind the mercantile was narrow, still in shadow. Min held onto Silas's arm like it was the only thing tethering her to this world. The wagon was old, weather-worn, but the mare, bless her, had fire in her eyes. "Climb in," Silas said. Min hesitated. "What if..." They follow Silas, look down at her jaw tight. Then we ride harder. He slapped the reins, and the wagon jolted forward. 3 blocks. That's all they needed. The main street was blocked, but the side trail wound toward the edge of town. Toward the ridge, toward the hills where bullets didn't travel so easy. But trouble wasn't done. From behind them, hoofbeats, loud, fast, eager. Min turned and gasped. They're coming. Silas didn't need to look. He could feel them. 5 riders. Blake Jennings in the lead, face twisted in fury, gun already drawn. Don't let them get away. A shot cracked the sky. The bullet tore through the wagon's sideboard. Splinters flew. Min ducked low. Another shot. This one grazed the mare's flank. She screamed but kept running. Tough as hell. Silas twisted in the seat, drew his revolver, fired once. Not to kill, just to scatter. The shot went wide, but it did its job. The riders fanned out, slowed just enough. Silas yanked the reins hard left. The wagon veered off the main road onto a rocky trail that led toward the ridge. Bumpy, treacherous, but narrow enough to slow horses. Min bounced in the wagon bed, clutching the rails, knuckles white. Behind them, one rider's horse stumbled on loose rock. Another nearly went down in the wash. But Blake kept coming. Ahead, 2 giant boulders formed a narrow pass, a funnel, a trap. Silas gritted his teeth. Hold on. They shot through the gap wood, scraping stone. The wagon shuddered but didn't break. Silas pulled the mare to a stop just beyond the outcrop. Jumped down. Drew his rifle. Stay down, he shouted to Min. Blake appeared in the mouth of the pass, fire in his eyes. You can't run forever, Ward. Send her out and maybe we let you live. Silas raised the rifle. Go to hell. The rifle kicked hard against Silas's shoulder. The shot cracked like thunder. Blake's horse screamed, reared, and bucked him straight into the dirt. Dust exploded around him as he hit the ground hard. Silas didn't wait. He racked the lever, chambered the next round, aimed again. But the others pulled back. Their fight lost its fire when they saw blood. When they saw that Silas Ward didn't bluff. Min peeked up from the wagon bed, face pale, eyes wide, trembling fingers gripping the rail. You all right? Silas asked, still watching the pass. She nodded. Then why? Why do they hate me? Silas didn't answer. Not right away. He kept his eye down the sights. Watching, waiting. Because hate's easy, he said at last. Easier than looking in the mirror. They weren't safe, not yet. The riders might regroup, might circle around, might come back with more. And then came the sound Silas had been dreading, more hoofbeats. This time from ahead. He turned, heart sinking. Another group. Closing fast, trapped. Min saw them too. They're everywhere, she whispered. We're gonna die. Silas looked at her, long and steady. Then he did something strange. He reached into his coat and pulled out the folded, stained piece of paper, the bill of sale. The one that said she was his. He held it in both hands and tore. The sound was sharp, final. What are you doing? Min asked. Setting you free. He let the pieces fall, the wind scattering them like ashes across the rocks. You're not property. Not anymore. Not ever again. She stared at him, mouth open, eyes flooding. But before she could speak, a voice rang out across the rocks. That's far enough, boys. Silas spun. Marshal Tucker, riding hard. 3 deputies behind him, guns out, faces carved from granite. The riders that had been closing from the front skidded to a stop, caught between Tucker's posse and Silas's rifle. Marshal Blake called from behind the pass. We're just stopping a crime. Funny thing about that, Tucker said, his voice clear cold. Turns out that auction this morning wasn't legal, which means what you did, what everyone who bid did, is a federal offense. He pointed his revolver directly at the lead rider. Human trafficking. You know what that gets you, son? Chains or a bullet? The riders began backing up, one by one, eyes shifting, guns lowering. Blake scrambled to his feet, blood on his cheek. This ain't over, Ward, he shouted. Yes, Tucker replied. It is. He turned in the saddle, eyes cutting through dust and heat. From now on, anyone touches this girl or this man, they answer to me. The riders scattered. Blake last. Rage in his bones, but fear in his heels. Silas lowered his rifle. His hands were still shaking. He turned to Min, who was crying now. Not from fear, but from something softer. Hope. For a long moment, no one spoke. Not Tucker, not Silas, not even Min. Only the wind curling through the canyon, whispering over broken rock and torn paper. That wind carried something sacred now. Not fear, not fury. Finality. Silas lowered his rifle. His arms ached. His back throbbed. But it wasn't from the fight. It was the weight. The weight of what he'd carried for too long. He turned to Min. Her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears, but her chin lifted. She met his eyes. Not as a thing. Not as a debt. As a person. Tucker dismounted, boots crunching gravel as he walked up to them. His face was tight, but his eyes were warm. You two all right? Silas nodded barely. Close enough. Tucker looked at Min, removed his hat, like he was standing in a church. Miss, no one owns you now. Not in this town. Not in this country. Not while I still draw breath. Min didn't speak. She just nodded, slowly. Then turned her gaze to the pieces of the torn bill fluttering like dying moths across the ground. Tucker glanced at Silas. You got somewhere safe 10 miles north. My ranch. Quiet, dry, no neighbors. Tucker nodded. Take her there, before sunset. He paused, voice lower now. You did a good thing, Silas. But don't expect thanks from this town. Silas smirked. Ain't expecting nothing but peace. Tucker mounted again. That I hope you find. He turned back toward the men still loitering in the hills, silent now, smaller somehow. And if any of you think about following... His hand dropped to his holster. I'll show you what justice sounds like. The men didn't answer, didn't move, just watched as Tucker and his deputies rode back toward Copper Falls, dust rising behind them like a curtain falling on a bad play. Silas climbed up into the wagon seat, reached down for Min. She took his hand this time. No hesitation, no fear. They rode in silence, the ridge behind them, the wind at their backs. And somewhere in that silence something healed. Not everything. Not yet. But enough to start. 6 months later, the land looked different. The dirt still cracked when the sun hit it wrong. The wind still howled at night like it was dragging chains across the stars. But something had changed. Something small. Something green. Rows of vegetables now lined the southern stretch of Silas Ward's land. Carrots, beans, peppers in neat rows, like soldiers that refused to die. Min crouched low between the stalks, hands deep in the earth, fingers steady. She didn't flinch at shadows anymore, didn't startle when wind slammed a door. Her face had filled out. Her voice grew stronger. She was free now. But more than that, she belonged. Silas watched from the porch, coffee cooling in his hand. He didn't say much, he never had. But the sight of her alive, working, thriving, said more than words ever could. He deeded half the land to her, took it into town himself, made the clerk read every word out loud before signing. First Chinese woman to own land in the territory. the man muttered like it was poison in his throat. Silas didn't blink. Won't be the last. People talked, of course. They always did. Some came to buy vegetables. Some came just to look. Others turned their wagons around when they saw her in the field. Didn't matter. The soil didn't care what language you spoke or what color your skin wore. It grew under the same sun. It gave if you gave. Min gave everything. She rose before dawn, worked until stars blinked through the dusk. She saved every coin, bought new seed, a second-hand plow, even built a chicken coop behind the barn. She laughed more now, quiet, soft laughter, but it was real. And some nights when the work was done and the sky burned orange behind the hills, she'd sit beside Silas on the porch, just the two of them. No words needed. One evening she asked, "Why did you do it that day, at the auction?" Silas thought about it for a long time. "I don't know," he said finally. Felt like I'd been waiting my whole damn life to say one true thing. That was it. She nodded. No more questions. The wind rolled through the fields like a lullaby. Somewhere out in the distance, a wolf cried. But it didn't sound so angry anymore. Just tired. Copper Falls never apologized, never admitted it was wrong. But it watched, from afar. And slowly, carefully, the town changed too. A little. One store started buying Min's produce. Then two, a boy from the schoolhouse came asking about seeds. A woman from the church left a sack of flour on their porch with a note, "I'm sorry. I didn't know better." Silas didn't trust the town. Not yet. Maybe never. But Min, she smiled when she saw those little things. Like watching wildflowers bloom between bullet holes. The war wasn't over. The scars didn't vanish. But the ground had been claimed. The first seeds had taken root. And on that porch, with the sun setting low and the fields whispering hope, two people who didn't belong to anyone finally belonged somewhere. Sometimes it only takes one choice, one voice, one broken old man who still remembers what justice feels like. If you were Silas, would you have stepped forward? Or would you have walked away, like the rest? Tell me below, because the next story might be yours.